Hey guys, it's me, Ellie, and I am here wondering if you guys would like to listen to a story that I have made. It's called Once Upon a King, and it's really long, so I'm just going to read the prologue and the first chapter in this video, and then in other videos I'm going to zoom to other chapters and all that. So if you want to listen, just listen, because I'm not going to make you get up and dance or act it out or anything. So hopefully this will help you relax, because this coronavirus stuff is getting really crazy and I am just aching for something to either help me relax or help me be active. So for those of you who want to relax, I am going to read the prologue and first chapter of Once Upon a King. So here's the prologue. It hadn't all been like this. The valley was now a grave, one no one suspected of such foul deeds. The grass encompassing it was still lush and green, the trees beyond it full, and the waters a clear topaz. The castle along the shore was bathed in warm sunlight, giving a peaceful illusion. Its banners flew high, the crest on such flags was seen for miles, but the real meaning it stood for was known only to a select few. Times before this looked very similar. But that was when different crests held the land, and the valley was fresh like the fields above it. And so the story begins, taking the vision of the past into account so as to complete the story. It had begun in the far years past. The castle was a happier place. As old as it was, it carried a new sense of life. Everyone inside it was excited today. Maids and servants hovered about like busy bees, each focused on their tasks and the new one ahead. They spoke in whispers. The maidens were picking up their skirts as they ran around, and the servants all spoke sincerely of the time to come. It was an important day of their year, the beginning of the annual feast in respect to the anniversary of the past rulers of the kingdom, and it had just been elevated to a higher importance. All had known of the expected news, and were no less like children when it had arrived. The lovely Queen Tillian had given birth to her third child. Word spread quickly that it was another son, a golden-headed one. Much joy was given to the people, especially those within the castle. King Stephen's smile was broader than ever, though he was no less proud of his other two children, Prince Zoltar and Princess Diana. Prince Zoltar was a beautiful little boy. His hair was that of his mother's, a raven black. His eyes were a caramel brown with little streaks of blue hidden deep within. A perfect picture of his mother, they all said, while this newborn carried more traits of his father. The heir to the throne was standing at his mother's bedside to see his little brother for the first time. His tiny fingers gripped the covers, watching as the infant slept beside his mother. Queen Tillian was stroking the thick blonde locks of her baby when she saw that Zoltar was giving a tiny frown. "What troubles you, my son?" Zoltar only replied with a baby shrug. A passel of thoughts and curiosities flickered on his eyes. Not yet 4, he had already shown the promise of being a strong ruler in stature and wisdom. He wasn't spoiled, though the household would have loved to do so to the precious boy. Both he and his sister had shown signs of being some of the most charming, humble children in the royal family. Zoltar watched as his little brother yawned. He gently reached out to touch the soft face with his tiny fingers. But then the door to the king's chambers opened, and King Stephen entered. He beamed as he walked over to the bed and stood beside Zoltar over his wife and son. "A darling, isn't he?" the queen cooed. "A strong boy," King Stephen agreed proudly. "My son Chandler." Another little face peered over the bed, reaching up to try and climb over. The little Princess Diana was too short to see the little brother, though she had already seen him many times. Being slightly over the age of 2, the concept of a doll had begun to grow in her childlike mind, and her brother was beginning to look very much like her own. King Stephen's strong hands picked her up to sit on the bed beside her mother and little Chandler. Her long black hair fell over Chandler's face as she bent over to look more closely at him. Zoltar was just climbing up the bedside to be next to his sister when Chandler gave a little cry. Both children jumped and gazed at the baby with surprise. Their parents found this amusing, and King Stephen's laughter rang in the room. "My 3 children, the heirs to the throne. Such blessings you are." Zoltar turned to his mother. "Ma, will Chandler and I both learn to be knights? Will he be a prince?" Yes, my dear, you both will be knights and princes, but you will be king someday, and Chandler won't. You're older than he is." As she was speaking, a loud, deep horn bellow rang from outside the windows. Its vibrating call carried a sharp warning, and King Stephen was on his feet, glancing out of the chamber windows to gaze out into the kingdom. The door opened, and a man known as Lord Simeon entered with a full suit of armor and a broad sword at his side. "My king, the castle is under attack. The enemy has infiltrated the lower levels." "What? Impossible! Where are the guards?" "They have engaged, but sire, there are more than we can count. You need to flee, my king." The king's robes billowed as he hurried after Lord Simeon. Zoltar heard his father say, "Raise the defenses. Call the knights and men to arms. I shall not leave my people defenseless." Queen Tilian was motioning to a nearby maid. "Quick, take the children into the nursery. All of them. Summon the personal guard." But the door swung open. It was too late. Men in dark armor and robes entered. They carried crossbows and aimed them at the bed where the queen and the children all huddled together. The maid gave a strangled cry as one of the arrows pierced her, and she collapsed on the floor. Queen Tilian gathered her children close to her, and the cries of the smaller ones rang through the room. The one man that entered looked less like a knight and more like a lord. His velvety robes were richer than those he accompanied. He wore no crown or helmet. A silver signet ring and the band in his dark beard glinted as he sheathed his sword and bowed. Years of war had only charmed his prime age, and he breathed the breath of a warrior. This was Malsirius, the Dark Lord of Ashes and Blood. The very room seemed to glow with the threat of his power. "Ah, my sweet, sweet dear Tilian," he greeted her cordially, a winsome but dreadful voice. "I am once again awed in the lovely presence of the queen." "Malsirius, you have no place here," she replied. "Many have said that, but all are wrong. I have come to your palace to seek some allegiance, or a term of surrender. The reign of your beloved is over, and mine cannot be stopped from rising. Call off your husband and his rabble. There doesn't have to be a fight." The knights surrounding the room were still and breathless. The danger grew more alarming in the silence. Queen Tilian tried to comfort her dears, but only Zoltar was tearless. Malsirius seemed to notice them for the first time, the promise of compassion seeping into his tone. "Be those your young ones, your majesty? And one so young, it seems that you had just birthed him hours ago. Such a pity that today was the day he arrived. But ho, your other son is growing strong. I see the look of his father in him. So young, yet so brave. A fine knight he would make, a fine knight. You're the heir, aren't you, boy? And your sister is as lovely as ever, the very image of her mother. Their fear is just, my queen. Listen to the babes. Their cries would only stream into the night if you don't surrender. I hate to put to death such promising children, especially yours. Come now, don't be stubborn. Stephen has already been slain, down in the great hall. There is only your word now, my lady. Give the word and call off your guards. I will take over as king." Queen Tilian remained unswayed. "Be it death or torture that awaits me, I will never surrender to the likes of you, Malsirius. God deal with me ever so severely if you lay a hand on one of these children. Their cause is innocent. Spare them, I implore you. But as for me, I will be a stone unmoved." Malsirius took the words with malice, but he seemed to consider them. He snapped his fingers and pointed to the children. "You, take the children and go. As for the rest of you, cleanse this castle of unloyalty." The mournful cry of the queen rang out into the air as her children and her life were taken by the hands of the evil King Malsirius. This is now chapter 1. The skies have grown darker and more treacherous. The rain had been pouring for days, and lightning struck the valley like the time on a clock. The valley was more like a pit of mud than anything else. The older buildings of the kingdom huddled in the part of the valley closer to the sea. The movements made by people were only in sync with the movement of the rivers of muddy water flowing down streets into the vast construction areas. The rain was filing down onto heads, dripping into the hair of those walking about, and filling the sky with thick turrets. The slippery ground made it impossible for workers, for that was what the entire population was, to carry their heavy burdens. Those older would sometimes fall and sink down into the mud for their last time. Young children wailed in their condition, but were silenced by the overseers. Whips became the brothers to the lightning, falling frequently upon broken and sore bodies. Men and women alike, along with boys and girls, toiled day and night to work. Their tasks became more than their lives. They were their caskets. Sites of unfinished buildings were illuminated by flashes of light and weak lanterns. Stone fortresses surrounded the valley like prison guards. Skeletons of ramps and pulley systems scathed the walls of projects, and the listless people worked on and on. Every now and then screams would penetrate the air. The work was more than unfinished. Brickmakers, carpenters, miners, architects, carriers, shovelers, and dumpers, and so many more taskers were the same ones as those who had worked years before on the same grounds. Once children, they had come to know only a life of slavery. They even coveted the position of servant, for that alone promised food, shelter, and more bearable burdens. This night was like every other to some people. Others kept slipping into despair at the sight of diminishing hope. Others found a release known only to the old or ill or beaten. That release was welcomed. No other was found. This one worker found a way to alleviate the work. A brickmaker, once so young and so lifeless in the day, had tapped into a childlike passion of dreams, but only for some time. This was possible because she was half servant, half brickmaker. During a few hours of the day, she would be summoned to the castle to care for the young princes and princesses of the king. But in the later hours, for her shift for caring of the children came in the morning, the brickmaking became her life. It was now that she was wanting that hour to come, the hour of the beckoning call to the castle in the morning. The basket on her back was weighed with pieces of brick no longer in the shape they were molded to be in. The mud under her calloused bare feet swallowed them whole. Her hair that had once been braided was now escaping in fierce wind and rain. The water falling beat against her and chilled her to the bone. Her weary eyes sought the dump pile where she was headed. The rain was so thick she could hardly see the other dumper ahead of her. She wiped a free, dirtied hand across her face to relieve herself of the blindness of the weather. In doing so, the mud on her face only multiplied. The heavy feeling of the muck only worsened. Her ragged dress suddenly caught on something, and she was forced to stop and see a man of many years clutching the drenched fabric. He had fallen, and was pleading in hoarse tones to her. "Help me! I beg you! Help me! The guard! He comes! Help me!" The terrified girl jerked her dress out of the man's hand and stumbled upon her way. She shut her eyes at the sound of the man's screams as a nearby guard whipped him. The last sound the man made rang in her ears. She nearly collapsed as she walked up a hill through the mud. Pieces of broken brick and wood were littered about, and some could be felt piercing the flesh on her feet. But she gave no cry, no plea for death. The deep passion for relief in real life was too strong. Monotonous, she pressed on. The dumper before her had found the dump pile near the remains of the village and outside the vast construction sites. The girl barely saw him stop and unload his basket and just about ran into him. Like a puppet with no feeling except that of routine, she emptied her own basket and turned to go back to her station. There, she knew, she would meet the brick trough that mixed the minerals and water to make the accursed bricks. The straw was dry, under a nearby pavilion, where brickmakers would take their share and ground into the adobe mix. The only relief was little walking, little struggle to go on. The decline of the hill was caked in watery mud, and one foot slipped. The girl was forced onto her knees, and the gravity pulled her shoulders forward. Rolling and sliding, the girl quickly reached the bottom of the hill. But she was covered in mud all over, and her basket was crushed. Lying face down, with only her shaking elbows to support her, the girl fought with the desire to remain as she was, to allow the mud to swallow her. Her face was inches from the surface of the dark water, and she heard footsteps coming towards her through the rain. Then, with a quick and harsh movement, someone hoisted her out only to shove her into another muddy puddle. "Get up! No sitting around, you useless slave! Get!" The girl scrambled through the mud and to her feet, using nearby wood and stone to climb out. With a cry of pain, her hands slipped off a sharp rock, and she held them up to see rivers of blood mingling with the rain. At a noise, she turned to see an overseer swishing his whip towards the backs of her bare legs. The sting made her run, and she didn't stop to see where she was heading, By heart she knew the way, and in no time was in a heap next to her spot at the trough. The basket, much lighter now, was still strapped to her back, but she made no move to take it off. It had become a part of her. She barely noticed. She leaned with all her strength upon the trough, unmoving except for the occasional gasp for breath. Her legs sank into mud, not as deep, but the pain of the whip melted away at the cool touch of it. Her hands were on fire, but the rest of her movement was more dear to her than anything. The misery was never ending, and the nightmare was eternally in the beginning. The clanging of a great bell echoed around the valley. This signaled the end of the day's toil, though for a short time they would begin again. The girl made no rise. She was too weak, too hurt. Her hands had numbed to their wounds, and her spirit had succumbed to the temptation to rest here. But once the last chimes of the bell faded into the night, two hands helped her to her knees and fumbled with the strings of the basket. The girl barely noticed that it had come off, and leaned heavily on the person, leading her away from the trough and into the village of the workers. Her feet met the wet, cobbled stone street, and the rain was not as thick as it once had been in the open. The village supplied shelter to many, and the glows of firelight could be spotted in rooms. The girl and her supporter hurried down the alleys and tight streets to finally come to a door in the wall of buildings. The girl was met with a dry room and a fire. The woman supporting her helped her onto a nearby bed. The bed was only made of blankets and straw, but it was comfortable. The girl lay upon them and didn't move until the woman helped her sit up against the stone wall. It was silent as the woman gathered rags and some ointment from a nearby bare cupboard to dress the girl's hands. "Come, Charlotte, drink this." The girl felt a cup reach her lips, and she gently pushed it away. "I've had enough of water forever, Louise. The storm has filled me with so much that I cannot stand it any more." "I can't stop from agreeing with you," the woman replied. The sound of the rain and the fire was soothing now, and the streets were quiet. The girl remained sitting against the wall, and the woman tended the pot over the small flames on the hearth. Shouts rose up, signaling the coming of the guards to check on the people. Louise turned to see Charlotte gazing out the open window into the gray light of the evening. "It does no good to look there, child. Evil lurks in the shadows here. Come, have some food. It would help." Charlotte accepted the warm bowl and piece of corn cake from the woman. She looked back out the window and watched as the overseers all moved about the streets. They pounded on doors and took a census like they did every night. Their armor glinted in the firelight of homes, and the rain only made the suits brighter. Swords hung close to their sides, their hands gripping the hilts tight as they patrolled around the town. The two women were used to the knock on their own door and didn't jump as a soldier poked his head in to count the number of people inside. Charlotte never looked any of them in the eye. Neither did Louise. Once they left, Louise rose from her position near the hearth to close the shutters of the window. "Sometimes I think the rain does more good than harm. In the drier days, there is more work." Charlotte set aside her empty bowl to watch as her friend began washing the clothes that they had left. With some effort, the girl rose and gathered the dishes from the small meal and took them to the wooden tub to be washed. She dragged the tub over to the fire and sat beside it to wait. "Does the king ever lighten our loads in terms of the weather?" "I believe he increases it." "It's only in the frame of mind that seems that way, child," Louise replied. "But he does not seem to care either way." Charlotte watched the woman scrubbing at the clothes in the washbin and noticed once again the sagging shoulders, the bent back, and the skinny body that made Louise look older than she was. For a second, she wondered what would happen to her if Louise had suddenly left, gone from this earth to be in a freedom many dream of. Her mind wandered to what that freedom could be. She herself was not yet ready to gain such a blessing, but Louise was close to the age where she was considered elderly. Louise was like her own mother, but she had never known one to make such a comparison. The woman seemed to know what she was thinking. "A lifetime passes away before many see the treasures it holds. Don't think so much about what it could have been, Charlotte. As for me, I have done and seen much to serve the king. Everyone has their time. Yours is later, child, so use what time you have left wisely." Charlotte grabbed a tub of now warm water and stuck her hands inside. A flash of pain ran up both her arms, and she held them there for a second longer until it faded away. "You have done more than your share of serving. Doesn't it frighten you to think about what you're doing at the hands of the king?" Louise only said, "I don't think it wise to ask questions, child. I only do it to help my people. But we were not meant to be slaves. What kind of humanity is meant for that? This king that we work and die under is not a king that I imagine a king to be. Louise turned her to face her grimly. Such talk is treacherous, Charlotte. Bite thy tongue. The guards have not yet left, and they may hear you. Charlotte went on with her task, her sore arms working vigorously to end the work. She suddenly threw the wooden bowl into the tub of water and began to cry. I can't do this, Louise. It hurts so much. Louise walked over and sat beside her, putting her strong arms around the distraught girl. Charlotte wiped her eyes and looked down at her bandaged hands. She knew it was useless to cry. Her outburst had released feelings that did not feel desirable. As angry and as tired as she was, Charlotte put it all aside when she felt her friend's embrace. They huddled close together, watching the fire burn in the wood they had left. It seemed hopeless now to dream. They both knew that. And that's the end of chapter 1. It should get into a brighter note the next time I read to you, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I want to hear what you think about it, so just let me know. Thank you guys so much. I love you all, and God bless.